Thanks for watching today on For the Sake of the Argument. Our guest was Natalie Price. She's currently House Rep for the 6th District in Michigan, and she's running for the 10th Senate District. And she talked about a visit she took to Minneapolis and what it was like with some other House Democrats throughout the country. The things that people are doing in Minneapolis to thwart ICE and their thuggery are inspiring and terrifying at the same time. So please keep following us so you can hear more, learn more, just like I do every week on For the Sake of the Argument on all social media platforms. Have a great day and do something important. Hey, welcome, State Rep Natalie Price to For the Sake of the Argument. I'm so excited that you're here today.
Excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So you are currently House Rep in Michigan's 6th House District, but you're running for State Senate in Michigan's 10th Senate District. Tell us a little bit about what that district is, what communities it comprises, and why do you want to change? Why do you want to run for Senate?
Yeah, Senate District 10 is a great district. It's newly redrawn. It includes areas that I currently represent of Berkeley, Royal Oak, Huntington Woods. It also includes Oak Park, which I represented last term. And then it picks up some amazing areas, mostly Oakland County. So Ferndale, Pleasant Ridge, Hazel Park, Madison Heights, Royal Oak Township, and Clawson. And then moves over into Macomb, half of Warren and Centerline. And I want to run for state senate because bringing 3 times as many constituent voices to Lansing will give me the ability to make a difference. You know, my time away from my kids is my most valuable thing. And when I'm able to make a difference, to influence the future of the state in line with our shared values, that's what I'm here to do. I'm here today, though, I'm hoping to talk about my recent trip to Minnesota. I've had an opportunity to go to St. Paul, Minneapolis, and visit organizers who are on the ground dealing with the occupation from ICE, and I'm really hoping to talk about that and uplift some of the stories of what people are experiencing there.
We're going to talk about that in depth because people want to hear about that like crazy.
Yeah.
But why you? Why does Michigan need you in that Senate seat?
So there's a lot going on right now in the world. Attacks of a unhinged Trump administration coming for Michigan residents, coming for our most vulnerable. And I believe strongly that we need people with our shared values and with the experience and the relationships to get things done. I'm happy to tell you about bills that I'm sponsoring and co-sponsoring that would help protect Michiganders from ICE, from the attacks on our rights and our freedoms, and going through, working those bills through the process, gathering support from other Democrats, trying to move the needle, the Overton window. It takes a lot of work up front. I am doing that work, and then I'll be ready to hit the ground running. As soon as we get that Democratic trifecta back, we need to be in full gear protecting Michigan from the Trump administration, and that's what I'm here to do.
Okay. Well, let's get into Minnesota. You were a part of a delegation of about 30 Democratic state reps around the country that went to Minneapolis recently to meet with organizers and elected officials amidst this latest chaos with ICE. Tell us about your experience, what it felt like, just everything you experienced there.
Yeah. So I flew there pretty late at night after attending session in Lansing. In Lansing these days, it feels like a lot of our time is just being wasted. We spend a lot of time sitting around on the House floor while Matt Hall does his vanity press conferences or whatever. But pretty much as soon as they dismissed us, I went to the airport, got on a plane, did a little update from the airport about where I was going and what I was doing. But grateful for the opportunity to go with Democratic state reps from around the country to bear witness, to stand shoulder to shoulder with reps and senators from Minnesota, to learn from what they are doing there. And like Michigan, they're in a divided government, right? They're in a challenging situation, trying to do everything that they can to protect their people from the ICE occupation. I have people back in Michigan when I'm out messaging on this and I'm messaging about how bad it was, what I experienced in Minneapolis and St. Paul. People say, well, it's bad here. And I know it is bad, especially in certain places of Michigan, Pontiac, Detroit. Now we're seeing increase ICE in Ypsilanti, but not at the level of what I saw in Minneapolis and St. Paul. There was so much fear from everyone, and it is impacting local businesses, the economy. Talking to business owners where in the last 6 weeks, there are people showing up to their restaurants, their grocery stores, 70% down in sales. Businesses are needing to close because people are too afraid to come out, go out to eat, go to the grocery store to
Everybody?
buy their food.
Just people in general, or are they talking about certain neighborhoods that might serve?
Some are worse than others, right? So, heard from a grocery store owner who owns a grocery store in an area where there's a heavy Mexican population. And he had recently, about a year ago, put some major improvements into his store, some renovations. He was just getting ready to break even, to be able to know that his grocery store would be sustainable. And then in the last 6 weeks, 70% of his business has dropped off.
Wow.
Now, there's always the silver lining of organizers who are stepping up to help. In this very Mexican area of St. Paul, they had us privileged white wine moms from the suburbs asking, how can we help? What can we do? And that was a great story of a grocery store owner who was able to put volunteers to work in meaningful ways. So a lot of his customers needed to do deliveries because they didn't feel safe leaving their homes. So he invited volunteers to come into his grocery store and help him pack up deliveries to go out, to take them out to the neighborhoods. He also organizers created a sign-up genius, PTA moms. I love how we bring our skills to this work, and covered shifts around the clock for him to stand at his grocery store door and keep it locked. Always. There is a white woman standing there ready to unlock the door and let customers in,
Right.
and then immediately lock it so that when ICE comes, there is no way that ICE is coming in the door because that woman will stand there and turn them away and refuse to open the door until they leave. And knowing that those volunteers are there, keeping the door of that grocery store locked at all times, makes the workers feel comfortable to come to work. It makes some of the customers feel comfortable to come and do their grocery shopping. I mean, this is a model of what I think we will need eventually in the Detroit areas, in our targeted areas, so that people can go grocery shopping, can go to the drugstore, can get their essential needs met. We need those of us with privilege of our white skin standing there and keeping the doors locked to keep ICE out so that people feel safe to go out and do the things that they need to do.
That's pretty amazing. Is there a takeaway coming from being in Minneapolis that you could bring back to the legislature that you think that we in Michigan in the legislature could incorporate what they're doing there? I know what you're talking about, the people are doing, volunteers and unpaid volunteers, if I still need to say that for anybody, volunteers and protesters that do not get paid. I can't believe how many people think they do. But
The people I was talking to definitely are
No.
not paid, and they are a lot of folks are retired. Or they have the ability to step away temporarily from their work to organize this work, but no, they are not getting paid, and they're getting burned out. I mean, meeting with some of these organizers, that became very clear. They have been on full time doing this work, building relationships and connecting volunteers to people who need help for 6 weeks straight. And one of their messages to us is to get the infrastructure in place, get the plan, and then have a backup so that when one of your core people gets sick, the whole system doesn't fall apart. They also encouraged us to look at the people doing the work right now. So I want to talk a little bit about the schools. We've got, in Minneapolis, they have parents, again, sign up genius, just signing up to do shifts, to be outside their kids' school all day long, just ICE watching to know and to then be ready to alert everyone with their signal chats when ICE is in the neighborhood of their kids' schools.
And then
They
what
also-
happens when that signal goes out, when people are alerted that ICE is there? What is that doing? They keep the kids in school, or they...
Yeah. So, and this is one of the many examples where ICE presence or the threat of ICE presence is making the kids in schools less safe. So before the occupation of ICE in Minneapolis and St. Paul, if there was a police presence near a school, the school would be alerted and then go into a lockdown to make sure that those kids were safe away from whatever was bringing in a police presence.
But not with ICE.
Not with ICE. Now that whole sort of basic way that we think about protecting our kids, it's like it's flipped. ICE is not law enforcement. They are there to enforce immigration according to how Trump is defining immigration, which, remember, is not how we would traditionally necessarily identify any illegal activity. So he is moving the goalpost, saying that people who would have been here completely legally, 6 months ago, now that status has been revoked and it's time to get them out. One of the moments that was so shocking to me, and it shouldn't have been, but it was a powerful moment. I attended a Senate, it was a state Senate committee meeting. They called a special committee. They are not in session right now. Unlike
in
Michigan,
Minneapolis,
in St. Paul, in the capital. Just backing up a little bit. Michigan, we have a full-time year-round legislature,
yes,
right? A lot of states don't have that. They have days when they're expected to be in session, like a month or two where they're in session. And then the rest of the year, a lot of, people who serve in the state legislature are off doing their other jobs. In St. Paul, in the capital, they called in a special session of their legislators to come in and hear testimony about ICE activity in Minneapolis, in St. Paul, in Minnesota. And they started out setting some context with some experts from the ACLU. And there was a state senator who asked an ACLU civil rights expert, are the social media posts of the Trump administration actionable? Are they seen as directives for instance, ICE? And he could show precedent that, yes, social media posts from this administration have been viewed by the courts as actionable items, directing military and otherwise, right from the top of how to act. Then she held up a printout of a Truth Social post that called for 100 million immigrants to be deported, and she asked, the expert, are there 100 million illegal immigrants? And he pointed out that legal or illegal, there are not 100 immigrants, 100 million immigrants in our country. And so the point that was made is when you are calling for 100 million people to be deported, you are calling for citizens to be deported. You are calling for an attack on Black and brown people, because we also have precedent now from the Supreme Court that you can pull someone over and detain them based on their race, their ability to speak English, the way that they look, the way that you perceive them, right? So racial profiling, using that as an excuse for detaining, deporting, we know that citizens are being detained and deported, and people are afraid. And it is impacting their ability to send their kids to school, to go grocery shopping, to engage in civil life, and to protest. There are so many people right now who want to be able to speak up and go on the street corner and hold the sign of, their rights. And they don't feel safe doing that. Even more so in Minneapolis or Minnesota, where there's an occupation. But the fear is that is shifting and becoming more and more prevalent throughout all of our states. And that's a big part of why as state legislators, we showed up together in Minnesota. This whole question right now is, do states still have the ability to protect our residents in our states? There are lots of things that we are trying to do right now to make sure that our residents are protected. But whether we're a blue state or a purple state like Michigan and Minnesota or a red state, do we have the ability to make the laws and to enforce the laws with our law enforcement, not ICE. Again, ICE is not law enforcement, but our law enforcement who has sworn an oath to protect our people. Do we have the ability still to require that and keep people safe?
I want to touch on two things. One, ICE is not law enforcement.
Absolutely not. They make our
Explain
communities less safe. They are not trained in de-escalation. They are not trained or expected to protect communities. They are expected to go in, take people out, and detain them. And
like a bounty hunter.
Yes, yes. And they make communities less safe when there is a fear of even just people of color being taken and deported, taken away from their kids. That fear makes all of our communities less safe. And we are seeing, I mean, Alex Preddy and Renee Good are just the white examples of people being killed by ICE. And then no due process, no protection of the scene, no gathering information, just, lying. The Trump administration using violence against people and then immediately going and saying they are domestic terrorists. It's an absolute lie. But as soon as we have a Trump administration who is using violence and then lying about the motives and the reasons for the violence and how it happened, none of us can feel safe going out into community. Of course, some people are being actively hunted by ICE. They're going to feel less safe than the rest of us. But in Minnesota, I felt that edge from everyone, whether it was walking through the airport, getting a lift to the hotel, interacting with people at the hotel. Everybody just feels on edge because they're being occupied by our own government.
So what's happening in Lansing? We don't have control. Democrats don't have control of the House or Senate.
We have control of the Senate.
The Senate, okay.
Yes.
And we've got the governor and the Secretary of State.
An amazing Attorney General.
And the amazing
Shout out to Dana
Attorney
Nessel.
General that's filed so many, I think probably of all the Attorneys General, she's filed so many lawsuits against the Trump administration.
Yes. So
she's
grateful for
standing
her.
up bravely at much risk.
Yes.
So how are you able to make sure that Michiganders are protected against what's going on by this group of thugs?
There's a lot that we could be doing that we currently have the ability to do. And I am working bills through the process so that if and when we get a speaker that's not Matt Hall that will put them up on the board for the vote, that we can get them into action and get protected. But let's talk about some of those bills, some of the things that we need. So bills to keep ICE out of hospitals, places of worship, courts, right? We know that when ICE has the ability to show up in those places, we are all less safe. We have people who are afraid to show up to court to testify against someone who has done them harm because they're afraid of ICE, right? That makes everybody less safe. We're now having, dangerous criminals going free because witnesses don't feel comfortable coming in and providing testimony against them because they're afraid they'll be taken away by ICE at the courthouse. Another example, right? We need to protect courthouses, hospitals, and places of worship from ICE.
And schools.
And schools, thank you. And schools, of course. We need to make it so that ICE cannot use city, county, state land as staging areas. And that they can't come into those buildings. Washtenaw just made it so that ICE cannot come into their Washtenaw County-owned buildings, their health clinics, their areas. I was impressed that they took that move, and I'm when other cities and other counties go to put those protections in place, I think it's helpful. It's standing up, it's speaking out. Now, of course, there's always the fear that if our county or our city takes a stand against this administration, then we might become a target. That is a real fear. I do not want to discount that. And I believe that the more cities and counties and states that take this position, that take this stand, the less likely any single one is going to be
numbers
unduly
game.
Targeted. So I am one of the leaders out there calling for everyone who feels remotely safe and comfortable to stand up, to make a statement, to say we are keeping ICE out of our community as much as we possibly can, do it. Put out the resolution, put out the press release, let the Trump administration know we're doing everything we can to protect our people from ICE.
How do you feel about defunding ICE, and what does that mean to you?
Oh, God, it's absolutely essential. So we are seeing ICE, again, coming in using violence against our own residents. This should not receive any funding from the federal government, obviously most directly, but so another package of bills that I have gives a way for Michigan to withhold federal payments. It would, when federal courts determine that the Trump administration is illegally impounding money away from Michigan, as we have found in the case of some after-school programs a few months ago, then Michigan would have the ability to place liens on federal property located here, to withhold our federal payments to the federal government in the same amount of what is being illegally withheld from Michigan from the Trump administration. Now, anybody who's taken AP history knows that this would prevent a question, is it constitutional for the states to be illegally withholding federal payments? Well, I want to force that conversation at the highest levels. For the courts, the Supreme Court, for federal courts to be saying to Trump, you are doing something illegal, but then to not give the states any ability to defend themselves, to stand up for themselves, to protect their residents, that is a conversation that I feel needs to be forced. We need to be standing up as states, doing everything we can to protect people from the violence of the Trump administration.
Is that universally agreed upon by other Democrats in the House and state?
I can't speak for others. I'm going to speak for what I am doing, what I am prioritizing. And going back to more bills that we have bills to make it so that law enforcement and ICE cannot wear masks unless there's an immediate risk to health, that they have to identify themselves. Putting those kinds of protections in place, those have broad support by Democrats, seem very common sense to me. We need our law enforcement and ICE, everybody who comes claiming to be doing a role of enforcement in our communities, to say who they are and to identify that, and then to be subject to prosecution. Whether it's a law enforcement officer or an ICE immigration officer, they need to have accountability for their actions. If they have training, if they are expected to uphold any standards, then they need to be accountable. And
when they don't do that,
exactly.
What about on the right, the Republicans in Michigan legislature? Are there any that are allies in this regarding ICE? Are they all towing the line?
I have seen nothing but towing the line. I am seeing my Republican colleagues trying to actually really harm the efforts that, for instance, one of the things that I feel very strongly about is, and sponsored bills to this effect, is that there should be no requirements for local law enforcement to cooperate with ICE. Now, I do it in quotation marks because how cooperate is defined is different every time I see
Fluid.
it. But what we know is that the efforts of House Republicans and Matt Hall in Michigan to try to tie the budget, appropriation, local resources to cooperation with ICE is an absolutely unreasonable and irresponsible action. And that's just going from like a good government point of view. I was on Berkeley City Council before becoming a state rep. I know how limited resources are for our local municipalities, our cities, our villages, our townships. They have really limited budgets, but partly because the state doesn't give them enough funding. That's a whole other issue, and I fight for that. Constitutional revenue sharing, we need to be supporting our cities. Those cities are responsible for the local law enforcement. They hire them, they oversee them, and they need to provide the funding for all the responsibilities that we're asking our local law enforcement to do. When Matt Hall says your city is not going to receive money unless you fully cooperate with ICE, he is throwing a huge unfunded mandate onto our cities. He is asking our law enforcement to do a job that they have are not trained for, are not funded for, are not expected and should not be expected to do, and not giving them any more money. In fact, he's doing the opposite. He's saying, we won't give you the money that you are already expecting unless you sign this letter promising to do something that even if they wanted to do, it's incredibly expensive and they don't have the money for. So, no, I think that not only should we be pushing back on the Republicans' efforts to tie funding to ICE cooperation, but we need to do just the opposite. We need to protect and say that our cities should not sign any letters of cooperation. They would be making their communities less safe, which is against the oath that they swore, and they would be using city resources to go against their own goals of keeping our communities safe.
Here. People are just so overwhelmed by all this. And what can you say to our audience who is overwhelmed, wants to look away and just crawl back under the covers? What's one concrete action that people can take on this week that'll kind of be helpful in some way in stemming the tide of this horror that is upon us?
That is the important question, right? What can each of us do to make this current situation less bad? And I think my challenge to your listeners is to look for the people who have been doing the work, doing some good in these spaces. And I'll give you a few examples. And then try to think about how your skills, interests, abilities, resources could help those people who are showing up and doing the work. So, for instance, talking to organizers in St. Paul, they mentioned the school counselors who are the ones there on the ground in the schools, the first ones who are often made aware, maybe by a teacher or a classmate, of whose parents were deported, who lost their dad, who was, the primary breadwinner for the family, whose mom was taken and is detained. Those school counselors know which kids need the groceries sent home, which kids need the extra bit of support to just make it through their day, and challenging community members to reach out and just offer. What do you have to offer?
Call the school office.
Yeah, call the school office. Ask the counselors, what can we give you? Is it some extra food, an extra coat, an extra, is there a lot, and depending on the schools, there might be an overwhelming amount of paperwork and processing that we can come in for a few hours and help. Is there a door that needs to be locked at all times, right? And I can stand there and be locked. Maybe not in the school, right? They've got their own security, but at a local grocery store, at a local, an area where we know there are more Black and brown people who are being targeted. Are there people there on the ground doing that work? Here in Michigan, we have the Michigan Immigrant Rights Center. My office did a town hall with them last week, the ACLU. There are people very plugged in through those organizations to community members, reaching out and saying, how can I help? I have this time. I have this extra food, this extra ability to organize, and I want to help you. Where can you put me to work? Where can you use?
That's a great idea. I hope people listen and do it, because just calling your local schools, Pontiac, Detroit, downriver, Lincoln Park, have large communities of people of color and people that are being targeted expressly. So, and I'm sure there are many, many more. We've spent a lot of time on this. We've got one more question, then we're going to wrap up. Okay. Currently in your position as House Rep, and if you're elected to your Senate seat, you know that these AI data centers are a hot button topic, and people are wondering what's going to happen, because there seems to be no oversight with their construction, no communication, even with the local authorities and the government authorities. So what are you doing right now to make sure that the public is informed and has a voice, and that government is overseeing these if they are going to be spreading like mushrooms in the dark? And what will you do if you're elected?
Sure, a little pivot, but again, it all comes back to protecting my constituents, right? And my community members. I I know data centers seem like a hot topic more out in the communities right now. They have been in Lansing for a while. I've been following these and carefully weighing positions that I take. As you will see from my voting record, I have been consistently against providing tax incentives for data centers, providing tax cuts. I voted no on the sales and use tax exemptions for data centers last term because I feel it is incredibly important that data centers pay their fair share. We know that the conglomerates behind them can afford when they come to Michigan, which they will, right? They want fresh water. They want our climate. Michigan is a priority area for data centers to come to. That we need to make sure that they're paying their fair share. So I am on record voting against tax incentives, voting against ways to try to entice them to come. My position on data centers is if you show me a package where they are paying for the site development, they are paying their taxes, they are signing community benefit agreements with the local municipalities, they are not going to be doing a race to the bottom for property tax cuts. Those are all important elements of data centers and what I'm trying to protect my constituents against. Part of it, too, is the concern because data centers rely so heavily on the electric grid and the water infrastructure that they have to pay their own fair share for the necessary improvements to that infrastructure as well. There need to be clear protections for the ratepayers, both utility and water, right? Making sure that a data center's presence and reliance on the grid is not going to be passed along to those of us who are already paying way too high for electric bills. So those are important elements. And then there's the commitment to our clean energy and jobs that we had last term. I was very proud last term in a Democratic trifecta that we set the model for the U.S. for clean energy and union jobs creating clean energy. I have not yet seen a data center project that is making a commitment to solar, to wind, to unions that I would expect to be able to come to Michigan without community demanding better of them. And that brings back to the question of transparency, public comment. You'll also see that I signed a letter to the Michigan Public Service Commission demanding that they go through the process, the public comment process for data centers. We cannot fast track these. We need to do this carefully and cautiously. And again, they want to come here. Let's set an example for the rest of the country of data centers paying their way, committing to clean energy, and not putting undue burden on the constituents of the districts to which they're coming.
All right. Well, I'm glad you're looking into all that.
Of course.
I personally say that data centers destroy our natural resources, and they can do nothing, no matter how much they pay, can ever repair that damage. And the job creation is on the front end. And I know the unions love that, and I get it. But after that, there'll be some robot sitting in some dark room in a corner running the whole show afterwards for years and years to come.
I'm glad that you're making people aware of that. That is very important that people know that when the data centers are talking about the jobs that they're creating, that they are very temporary construction jobs. And temporary construction jobs are important. I'm not discounting that. But people need to know when the data centers are messaging about bringing jobs to Michigan, that they are temporary. Another element when we think more long-term after those construction jobs are over, we also have to think about the lifespan of all of the guts, all of that equipment that's in the data centers. Part of why I voted against the sales and use exemption for all that equipment is because it will need to be replaced. This is not a temporary thing. If they never need to pay taxes on every time they have to replace that equipment, who's going to be responsible ultimately for cleaning up the mess, right? I'm on the budget committee for EGLE, Environment, Great Lakes and Energy. It's like the environmental protections arm of the state. Mm-hmm. When companies are coming into the state of Michigan and then getting all these tax exemptions, they're not putting the resources into our oversight, into our protections, and into our eventual cleanup of their sites. So without polluter pay bills, which I would also fully support and vote for as soon as those get on the board, we need polluters to pay the cost of the pollution that they leave behind.
Right.
In the meantime, we need to be looking forward and having these corporations come and pay their taxes so that we have the funding that when eventually it falls on the state to deal with the cleanup, that we have the ability to do that. If they're getting out of paying their taxes, we won't have the resources to monitor and clean up the mess that they leave.
No, we're left holding the bill again.
Yep.
Well, Natalie Price, good luck to you in your run for the 10th District Senate seat, and congratulations, and thanks for being here on For the Sake of the Argument. It was lovely to have you.
Thanks so much for having me, Lori, and thank you for raising awareness of these important issues in our communities.
Thank you.